Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission. This is your gateway to insights and inspiration as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Pretty stoked. We got Monsieur Seb Lavoie joining us. We got Pat Miller here. We got Shaun and myself, and I am pumped for this. We're going to be talking about drawing the line. But before that, draw the line with your mouse. Hit the button, hit the buttons, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine and Fridays for The Collective. We can get into some intros real quick here. Pat, I'm going to hit you up first. 10 to 15 seconds. Hit
her. Pat Miller, infantry guy, 20 years in the military, went special operations 8 years, got out of the military, ended up in the film industry, armor and military advisor, but mainly pursuing professional photography.
Bam. And just came back from a trip as well, last I heard.
That was October, actually. That was
bad. Oh, well.
Just finished.
Come on. Still just happened, but in my mind, it just happened because you just told me about it. But
well, I'm going to King of Hammers. That's the next trip. That's what I'm doing for some photography for.
What's King of Hammers? What's that all
King
about?
of Hammers is a huge desert race for almost 2 weeks. They call it the Burning Man of off-road races. So I got a media pass for that. So I'm super stoked. So I'll be covering that.
Because it could have also been really weird as well, King of Hammers.
Oh my God, is this how this day's starting?
So we've already spoken about crossing swords and King of Hammers.
we're getting into it early.
Chance was drawing with his mouse. I mean, come on.
Yeah, there you go. I'm doing all the things. Seb, how about yourself? How's life down in southern Alberta?
Well, right now, I feel like I'm in, there's two things that are going to happen here. I'm either going to pass out or I'm going to spontaneously combust because the heat is cranked up in my office through the sun that's shining. It's about 8 degrees here. It's beautiful. I've heard about the Alberta winters. I haven't seen them yet. Anybody?
Yeah, you guys have had a really weird winter this year for sure.
It's been very, very mild and super nice. Actually, I have probably 30% snow and 70% grass around these parts right now.
It's crazy,
man.
I know.
That is crazy. I don't think it's been like 4 or 5 degrees up north here, and it is blowing my mind because there's just ice everywhere now, and it's annoying. But we should have a ton of snow, and it's just not showing up. It's crazy.
That's going to be tough for summer. I mean,
it'll be tough in June.
I'm not speaking about the farmers. I'm not speaking about whatever. I'm talking about like wildfires.
Oh, yes.
Like fires is going to be a thing.
Well, I'm the wildfire show that we were planning last year in the fall. I'm still got that in line. We're going to get that in the spring beforehand. Everything gets started out, and we're gonna have a serious talk with that, especially with what happened in LA and all that stuff. We need to get more information out there. Now, today though, we're going to be talking about, like I said, drawing the line. And I want to get you guys' first thoughts before we get to any videos, anything else. What are your first thoughts on drawing that line between being, let's say, nonviolent and violent? What are you guys' first thoughts? Seb, I'm going to hit you. What do you think?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for whatever reason is most people that have a hard time understanding where to draw the line live in a utopian world, and in a world where either they haven't been victimized themselves or they haven't been faced with the prospect of severe violence with very little option and time compressed. And that's the first thing that comes to mind, because really from a philosophical standpoint, we would all love to stand here and say, yeah, violence is never the answer. And, if we talk about, let's make a correlation real quick with guns, for example. We can have these debates all day. But here's what isn't debatable. If you said to me, we are going to disinvent firearms, are you good with that? I'd be 100% in. But you can't do that. It's the same with violence. You can't obliterate it because humans are being humans and they're going to do what they do. And so we got two choices. You stand by and hope it doesn't happen, or you watch others being victimized by it or yourself, or you prepare for it. So those are my initial thoughts.
I like it. Pat, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation today because, it's like going into the civilian world from the military after being, I guess, institutionalized for 20 years, and where I've kind of gone in my career. So I'm sure we'll touch on that as we go. But like, it's like, when you're a young infanteer, it's almost like encouraged to be violent. You know what I mean? Like, you go out to the bar and like, get into a scrap. It's like, there's sergeant majors that will give you a high five for, scrapping at the bar, and then you end up in like a different unit. You get to a public fight, even if it was to defend yourself, like up to a point, you could jeopardize being in a unit, you know what I mean? And you're gone. And then you move into the civilian world and it's like it's a whole different world. And like the reaction to violence and protecting, like, say, like a common citizen from an act of violence and stuff like that, it's like, at what point do you engage? So I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. You engage too early, you look like the aggressor, and you could wear it hard. And if you engage too late, that person could lose life and limb, or your own self. So it's going to be, I find it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And there's the added effect of the legal system afterwards, because here in Canada,
100%.
self-defense is not a given right. So, Shaun, what are your first thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for engaging in this topic, because it can go in a whole bunch of different ways, and I think we do have to be a little bit careful on how we present some of our opinions or etc. I'm going to try to be careful anyway, to make sure that I'm not just giving my undivided opinion, and then not couching it with, but that's Shaun. That's what I do.
Yep.
And so now that I've said that, let me explain what I mean by that. I did give this subject some thought this morning. And funnily enough, this subject is, I believe, Chance, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're doing this topic this morning because a local friend of mine, shout out to Petri here, Roslyn Brewery, he shot me a DM last night, and it was a clip of a video of a fan in a stadium, and he's just chirping at this guy's wife, and I mean he's chirping hard, and he's being like, he's beyond rude. He's being confrontational to a degree where he is trying to set up a fight. He's trying to set up some violence. And maybe we'll get to that video, maybe we won't. But the reason that we're kind of engaging in this today is because one of the locals here had said, like, what would you do? What would you do? What would I do? What should we all do? And he went on to say that, like, a lot of men think they would do something, but in reality, perhaps they should do something else. And so that's kind of why we're in this. Now I'm going to give my little 2 cents here. I'm with Pat. I was taught violence, man. And actually, I was pretty freaking good at it. I liked it. I liked violence. And the more I did it, the more I was trained in it, the better I got at it, the more I liked it. And so this morning, I put up a post just before we came into this combo. I put it up about 5 minutes before we came into this live. And it's me back in the day in 2 Commando. We're out on an area called the Mattawa Plains, which was like the hardest dirt in the world to be doing judo throws on. And so we were going to do this unarmed combat demonstration for, it was called Family Day. And so all the troops, all their wives and all their kids would come down to this event and stand there and see, we'd call it a dog and pony show back in the day, see what the troops were doing. And so we had this demonstration team of all the karate chops and stuff. And so myself and my partner being tasked with come up with something that is flashy, come up with something that is like good for the crowd, come up with something almost sexy, outrageous. And so my partner and I stepped off to the side, and I'd been doing martial arts for a while at that point. And I said, how about a spinning crescent kick? Let's do that. And which is a ridiculous kick on the modern battlefield, of course. I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. But it was for the crowd. And so what we did was we set up a scenario where my partner had a Browning high power 9mm pointed right at the back of my head. It was touching the back of my head. The barrel was touching the back of my head. And I had my hands up in the air as he was standing behind me, poking me in the back of the head with his barrel. And the deal was that I was going to neutralize him. And I was going to neutralize him with a spinning crescent kick. So as I spun around to kick his arm, kick the weapon offline, we realized that, yeah, okay, maybe. But let's see if this is for reals. And so I set the win conditions and said, you pull the trigger every single time you think I'm going to move. If you get a dodgy feeling, if you feel me twitch, if you even get a hint of an idea that I'm going to do anything offensive other than just hold there and comply, you pull the trigger. And we got it to a point where 9 times out of 10, I could beat him to the trigger pull. I could kick the weapon offline. Now, again, it's not practical. It was just a proof of concept for us and for the crowd. And it's something that I would never, ever do in reality if I was in that moment. Because I had other tools that were less sexy looking, which were less crowd oriented, which were more devastating, we'll call it. And we all had those tools in our belt. We all had been taught how to do that at the time. The Canadian Airborne Regiment at the time was a pretty ferocious unit that was comfortable with constantly exploring violence. And so that's where my background started, was in a unit which encouraged violence. Then I went on to other units that helped shape that violence into a more scalpel-like tool as I went into special operations. Now, if I'd have gone from special operations out into the civilian world and then just kind of wandered the world, I'd still have like all of that violence in me, that ability, without any refinement. I was super duper lucky that when I left the teams, I went straight into the Ontario Police College, where I became a use of force instructor. So then I had to start learning things like the use of force continuum. I had to start learning when it was appropriate and when it wasn't. I learned things that I didn't know that actually weren't that applicable in a military setting, about violence when and violence when not. And so I did learn a bunch of things back then. But in the last 2 years, because of all of the guests on this podcast, like Seb as the example, I've learned way more than I did when I was in the Ontario Police College in that game of violence. And so if not for further training and further friends and further conversations after I left the military, I'd still have my ways, and they wouldn't be very refined when it comes to these moments of violence. So where do I draw the line now? It's way different than when I drew the line back in the day. And I mean, so different that it's like another person back in the day understanding of violence than Shaun of today. So I don't think the line is carved in stone. The line is constantly shifting based on who we're around, the moment, and what we've learned in life.
Yeah, I really like that. I have a video that I want to get into, but I want to see if anybody has any thoughts before we jump into it. Seb, what do you got?
I pretty much forgot, but it was something to do with. It's interesting how you can get to very similar outcomes having two different sort of catalysts. Because I was the opposite of that. I disliked violence. I disliked it at all cost, and eventually that cost was me. And so I was taught that if in order for me to prevent this from happening again, either with me or with people that I loved or people that I eventually would care for, I needed to be very good at it. That was my way of interfering with it, but it's not because I liked it. It's not because I enjoyed it. It was a means to an end. It was a personal and operational reality, and I saw it very sort of stoically. Right, there was no real engagement of emotions in there. It was just, this is a mathematical equation, and the answer just so happened to be controlled violence.
I like that. I'm getting this image of like World War I trenches, of like when you're drawing lines, like these lines they're static, but they need to be adjustable in case things happen, right? So like if you need to fall back or if you need to move forward, you shouldn't have to like die on a position. But at the same time, you need to be able to fight for that position as well. So it's this is going to be really interesting. Pat, you got any other thoughts before we jump into a video?
No, I agree with everyone that's kind of given their thoughts so far. It's and it will be interesting as we go into it. I'm curious what the video will be about, because it isn't a static thing. Like it's definitely it definitely has flexibility. And if like I was saying earlier, like if you make that wrong choice and engage too early, you could be sitting on the wrong side of the law. You could be in the wrong. You could have diffused it, or the opposite way around. You could be standing there with a blade in your chest, and you'd be like, "Oh, well, I should have did something else." And then it'd be also interesting too. Like, I mean, everything that leads up to it, because I mean, not to use like an army dork term, but this is like this is a lot of like rules of engagement stuff, right? Like, where's my warning shot? Where's at what point do do I exercise those things before the fist is thrown, or the block, or the punch is deflected, or whatever, or I'm running across the street to stop a dude from doing something. So it's all about that ROE that's going to come into this conversation, I think, as well, right? Like posturing, getting aggressive. Okay, now I need to friggin', you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like you just have to react and prevent, or react and like, do. And sometimes it's is this a de-escalation? Is this a friggin', am I going to friggin' when, at what point do I provide aggression? Right? Like this isn't just like, where is the line? Because there's lines for different things, right? There's the line for verbal aggression, posturing, and then it's gonna be good. I'll stop rambling.
That's all good. I think there's also a point in there of your own capability, right? Like if you see a bank robber run into a friggin' building and you're gonna be like, I'm gonna go stop him, and you go run and shake, like maybe call the police. Like there's other there's other avenues here. So let's get into this first video, and then we'll chat about it. Here if I can press the right button. Here we go.
This video is doing the rounds.
Let her go! What are you doing with her?
I seen it years ago.
What are you doing with her?
Bro, this is man's family, bro. Move.
This man's family.
This is man's family. Move from me, bro.
Is that the same one that just walked past us, Mum?
Watch this to the end. Tell me how it makes you feel. Well done to this woman. It's not easy what she's doing.
So what are you doing in the corner with her? Are you okay?
At least I have a platform now where I can highlight it. A year ago I couldn't.
I'm following you.
Look, why are you fucking stalking man, bro?
Are you okay? Do you know him?
Poor child. I was just trying to go to school and he told me to suck his dick. In my eyes, every adult is responsible for the world that little girl lives in. And if she has to go through that because we're too soft, what does that say about us?
Bam. Let's discuss. Shaun, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And good on the individual who read the situation for what it was and had the will, the tenacity to engage in the moment to see if, in fact, their instinct was correct. At no point did that individual turn into a full sprint and chase the person down, tackle them, and get all crazy with their camera, hoping for maybe an Instagram famous moment. What they did was they were sensible about it, in my opinion. I think they kind of did it right. Now, there's always room for improvement, but I think I appreciate someone who feels what they feel and follows their gut and engages in the moment in a way that produces an outcome like that. It could have gone bad, though. It could have gone sideways. And so my opening statement is I'm glad that happened, but I've got to be careful and say that it could have gone sideways. And so if that individual, the man, would have recognized that his plan was unraveling and that he was kind of on camera but not really caught his face at that point, he could have pulled a blade. And being England, where there's a lot of edged weapon problems, more so than gun for sure. It's a very big knife culture over there. I mean, that could have been the end of that story. And so I think that this video reminds me of understanding who you are and what's important to you and the tools that you bring to bear in the moment. I'm not sure how well trained the person was who was following the abductor, but they seemed confident-ish. But I wonder if they were confident based on an unknowing confidence or a skilled, trained, and sensible amount of confidence, if you will.
Yeah. Seb, what are you thinking?
Yeah. My question when I watch videos like this is exactly what Shaun just said. Who was she? You know, because to me, she might as well have been a UK cop, because they act like that very much. So I wouldn't be surprised if she was a Leo, and if she was, then we can start, you know, really looking at how things could have been done better. But we'll pretend that we don't know that, and that person isn't, and that person is just deciding to interfere with something that she feels is wrong. So now it becomes a question of priorities of life. Is my life, is whose priority, you know, who is in priority here? And really, if you have a little girl with an assailant like this, I think that most sensible people that have a heart in their chest are going to take the hit, right? My life is not nearly as important as that little girl's life. That's a very tough call to make, and that has to be organic, and it has to be that's truly something you embrace, because the consequences attached to this could be catastrophic, as Shaun alluded to. But then there's the second piece to this, which is the mitigation piece. So now the person has made a decision that I cannot let him leave with her because I believe that she's in danger. So how am I going to mitigate the risk in addressing this? And she kept, you know, she had a lot of quite a bit of distance, right? And that gives her a bit more time to react if something happens, and have the ability to take some actions or countermeasures, so to speak, right? But also, what are the other options? Because if you keep on repeating the same thing and it's going nowhere, like, I'm hoping some of the factors that we don't know is that she's called 911, that the phone was, you know, open, that the line was open, that people could either hear or would actually know that something's going on, those types of things. And then you need to start looking around as well. Like, who else can I engage in this incident? Is there anybody around? Can we make some commotions? Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but the point is, it was a great humanity-based decision as far as I'm concerned, and it probably saved that little girl's life, because one thing that people don't like post-incident is to have a potential witness walking away, right? So we don't know what could have happened to that little girl. It could have been a lot worse than what he was asking for, evidently. And so, yeah, very, very well done if this was a civilian, as far as like preventing something very, very serious from happening here.
Yeah. There's so many lanes I want to go down on this one, but Pat, I want to get your thoughts on it first, and then we'll start chatting.
Yeah, it was definitely a good video. It was heart-wrenching and heartwarming at the same time, that somebody would actually, heartwarming in the sense that somebody would actually engage. You know, the biggest thing that I see in society right now is people are afraid to engage, or are definitely more self-preservation, and so they don't want to engage. We live in I live in the Lower Mainland, and it's, there's a potential you could be in about 10 of those scenarios in one day. Is it worth it to engage? And I think that one was a good one. I think that was worth it. And we cut down on phones sometimes, like everyone just filming and wanting to be a YouTube star, but I think she was actually using it as a mitigation tool. You're on camera, dude. Like, so I mean, like, these are all, again, those ROE things. We could definitely pick it apart, and there's like room for improvement, but I mean, because that dude was pretty big, so he could have probably smacked her down just as quickly. But I think she made the right choice, and I think she made some good moves. She's not law enforcement, like I was saying. If she is just a civilian, She made some good choices. I know that was really good. It's I like to see that, because that was the right scenario to engage.
Yeah, this it really brings forward a point even in my head, and I got a comment on the Instagram side here. The real Nick Fury jumped in here. He said, "I'd take a charge to protect her. The justice system is weak, and these guys get slaps on the wrist. If it's not her, it'll be someone else." Which brings me to my thought on this was that we used to say when I was in that better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I'd much rather do something than not do something and have worse consequences. But to the point of, how much attention plays into one of those ROEs, right? Like if you see somebody doing something nefarious or you have a feeling that something is wrong, just by drawing attention to it can mitigate a lot of circumstances. Just by, hey, what are you doing? Like engaging them either verbally or with the camera, like that can do a lot. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to just even engage verbally on this, and it's a very tough line to kind of go down. Shaun, you got any additional? Oh wait, Pat, what do you got?
I was just going to say, right? One of the reasons that a lot of people don't engage is because they don't understand the tools of escalation. Because you can escalate, but it's also could be escalated on you. So as soon as you pull out that phone and you escalate, and you say, "Hey," they don't have the tools or the knowledge, whether they haven't done martial arts training or I mean, whatever they do in their life. I think a lot of people are afraid of that escalation ramping up at a very exponential rate, and they don't know what to do. So I think that's a pre-thought that goes through a person's head when they're about to call someone out, right? I mean, maybe that woman didn't at the time, and a lot of people do just react out of the kindness of the heart or the goodness of their internal soul. But if they've seen or been around a lot of violence, that there's that psychological block, whereas like this could ramp, you know, to a stabbing or something worse. So I'm just not going to engage at all, which also sometimes isn't the answer, especially in a scenario like we just watched.
Absolutely. Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, it's there's so many options, and I think one of the problem that we have is if you have never ran those types of scenarios in your head, and we talk about this all the time, but it's going to be very difficult when it does happen and you're now going live for you to make some sensible decisions, and you're going to have to be very cool, calm, and collected. And let's call a spade a spade. Most people, if you cut them up in line at the bank and they want to tell you to go back in line, they're full of adrenaline. They'll be shaking and everything. It's like, oh man, sorry, I didn't see you there. I'm going to go back at the back of the line, kind of deal. But I think that humans in general, and we know what the data is on, interpersonal human aggression and how terrified of that most humans are from a primal standpoint. But the fact is, you have to kind of think about these scenarios, and not thinking about them isn't going to alleviate them, but it's going to create a block for you when the time comes. So it's cool to have multiple options, at your disposal. And at the end of the day, if you have the capacity for physical violence, but that's even better because you have all these options before, and should push comes to shove, you have the capability to do something as well. But even if you didn't have that, the amount of things that you could do from a strategic standpoint that doesn't include putting yourself in harm's way, maintaining visual contact, creating angles, filming from a distance, calling while continuing to follow, until there's an additional line in the sand that's added. So for example, imagine if that lady decided to go around the building to flank them and just kind of watch them go by while she's talking to police, providing descriptions, doing all of the things. And all of a sudden she's like, look, if this gets to a car, this is when I'm jumping in. This is my line in the sand. So this is when that flexible line in the sand can be brought along with you if you have considered those scenarios before. But man, without that, I mean, you are pretty much at the mercy of whatever it is you're going to do.
That's a great point. Shaun, what are you thinking?
Well, this comes off of a thought from yesterday, and I've got to do some much deeper research on this. I just happened to bump into a YouTube video where it is discussing, I think it was on Big Think, but what they were doing is discussing how if you get put in a MRI device scanning the brain, and you're asked to make decisions on 1 + 1 = whatever, before you've chosen your answer, before you're even aware that you're choosing an answer. The answer's already been chosen by your neural network, by your brain. Now, I'm not going to build this out in a big way because that's not what today's show is about. All I will say is, on a surface level, your response was determined years ago by your training, by your awareness, your situational awareness or lack of, by your ability to engage in velocity, by your understanding of kinetic energy, by your understanding of ... In other words, the more you've been in the game, the more the game unfolds for you without thought. And so, as it turns out, and this is something that I have to dive deeper into, and I plan to do it today. You start making decisions on the thing that you're doing right now several seconds beforehand, upwards of 4 seconds before you choose your decision. Your decision was made by all of your programming that you've engaged in over the years. Your life sets you up for the decisions that you make that you're unaware of, that are made for you from years ago. And so what we do in life is a result of what we've done in life. And sometimes we don't have a decision to make in it. It just freaking happens. I believe our job is to let it happen, but control it as it's happening, rather than not let it happen. In other words, to explore ourselves, we have to let life unfold naturally rather than putting too many brakes on it to better understand ourselves when we've got the time to understand ourselves. That moment in that video is not a time to understand yourself. That is a time to rely on your programming. And if you weren't programmed well, if you haven't programmed yourself well, if you've never, at the very least, visualized these kind of scenarios to work through the visualization of what you would do, you're unprogrammed, and therefore your choices are unprogrammed, and therefore the outcome is really a massive roll of the dice. And I'm not a gambler. And so I like to take matters into my own hands through my programming, I suppose, and ensure that whatever the outcome is, it's playing for our favor, for the side of good rather than the side of evil.
Mm-hmm. Seb, you got a thought?
Yeah, man. You know, I had a really interesting conversation with a person that I would consider a friend, and we had never really discussed this. And hopefully, I can capture it briefly. But basically, there was a video of moms being asked, "Would you kill for your child?" And a lot of people have seen it. It's gone around, and all of this stuff. And there's all kinds of answers and all kinds of things. And there's people saying, you know, a few saying yes, others saying absolutely not. I would only do something legal. Other people said a whole bunch of goofy things. But I think at the end of the day, none of those people had ever been faced with that situation. And that is where the problem is like how you think you're going to react or how you think you're going to be willing to do certain things is only as accurate as how many times you've actually done that. And that you're very aware of your capacity and in context. And one of the things that was brought to my attention by this friend of mine, when I spoke about visualization and, you know, preparing for these incidents, she brought a bit of a different angle. And I was a little perplexed that, you know, by it, but it was a great exercise in introspection for me. When you look at life through your lens, so you've done all this training, you've done all these things, you've been engaged in martial arts, you had to fight your way out of things and all this stuff. You look at life through a very different lens than somebody that's never had to do that, that's never engaged in that, that's never been a part of that. And so one of the things she had said to me is, what are the chances of me, say, having to make that critical decision or that potentially catastrophic decision? And she says, okay, let's say if we were to argue that might happen 5 times in my lifetime, you know, and I think that's a reasonable, like, for something like this, to that extent, I would say for most people that are not professionally engaged, that's probably reasonable, right? 5, maybe 6, 7, 10, maybe, I don't know. If you live, depending where you live, of course, it's all context dependent. If you're in Compton, you probably did that 10 times last week. But the fact is, what she was saying to me is, when I start visualizing my stress level reaches an unmanageable level. And so it creates all this anxiety in relation to life. And she's already anxiety prone. And so being anxiety prone, when she starts thinking about these scenarios and running them in her mind and everything, it just increases her anxiety to an unmanageable level, which makes her life completely miserable. And so she's like, now I got two choices. Something happened and too bad I didn't prepare for it. And I do the best I can, hoping for the best kind of deal. Or I spend my time visualizing things that create hell on earth for me as far as living my everyday life. And that was, I'm not suggesting that, she was right or she was wrong or she was anything other than it stimulated some thoughts on how I view the world and what kind of lens do I have on when I problem solve things or when I look at things in an objective manner. And I think that there's a lot more people out there like that. There is a lot of people that, are on survival mode through life, let alone start to run these scenarios that increases that anxiety, that increases that level of sort of discomfort or fear or whatever you want to call it. And so I'm just bringing this to the panel, you guys, just let's talk about it. Like, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I wrote down initially belief. This is the key thing, I think, when it comes to the people that have never experienced this type of violence or have no real engagement in it through their life. I think a lot of people go through their lives with a belief that they have lines in the sand, right? That I will not cross this. If this happens, I will absolutely do something about it. But they've never put any thought to it, like you're saying. And for some that do put thought to it, their anxiety kicks in and they're like, oh no, I don't want to think about it. But it's a bit of a challenge because if you don't think about it, you don't engage it, you'll never be able to test that belief once it comes. Too many people get these beliefs in their head and they just kind of like, yep, we're good to go. If something bad happens, I'll know what I'm doing. What do you got?
But here's where this gets interesting, right? Because belief is one thing, action is another. And so this is where this line is a little bit can get a little bit convoluted. It's like, okay, so now you've made a decision that you're going to spend more time in your head running these scenarios through your head, but you've also never experienced anything like it live. And so now you're visualizing yourself into a scenario to which you have no physiological or emotional capacity to really live it, so to speak, because you don't know what it feels like. I'm going to give you an example of this. I know Sean's going to laugh, is going to like that. But your first jiu-jitsu tournament, I can tell you all day how when you're holding on to that grip too hard, are you going to burn your forearms until your forearms are on fire? Like, did somebody just hit you with a freaking flamethrower? But it's not going to make any sense until you have done it, right? And so one of the things that further to that conversation with the same person in the same conversation, we started talking about, okay, so say for the sake of argument, I do what you have said and I start preparing my mind, even if it creates a lot of anxiety and everything. When I come to the realization that I must establish a line in the sand, my capacity to weaponize my thoughts is non-existent. Like, I wouldn't know where to hit someone with what, or even how to hold it. So now it's where the conversation gets interesting, because if you're visualizing, but there's never a physical portion to that, where you get to sort of incrementally implement some of these tactics, some of these things that you're coming up with, then what are you actually doing?
Great point. Pat, you got any thoughts?
No, Seb's got a great point. It's I guess this is where, like, the part of the show where it's like, go get training. You know what I mean? Like, even if it's a simple martial arts class, like, if you don't actually physically ever engage in anything like that, run scenarios physically, the mental of what you would do is the spectrum is wide, right? Because you'll have the group that's like, like we were just talking about belief. It's just like, I would never do that. And then there's people like, I would punch that dude in the face right away. And it's like, it's probably in between those two. It's like, if you've ever actually physically ran through some scenarios or at least had experience or gotten punched in the face before yourself, you'll know, like, it's not these extremes, right? And it's I read something the other day, I thought it was a great quote, but like you take any extreme to the end and you're blinded, right? If you go all the way to the dark, you're blinded. If you go all the way to the light, you're blinded, right? So, and the people have these scenarios. This way, a lot of us think, we think very polarized now, and I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it comes down to when it comes down to violence and scenario building and thinking about this stuff. Yeah, you can drive somebody straight into anxiety, even thinking about engaging. You know, and the opposite, where someone's just a complete hothead. So yeah, I think that's the part where it's like, you know, go get training. And I was also thinking about during this moment, I don't know if you guys have watched Fight Club, but I think we all have. There's a part of the movie where their assignment is to get into a fight with somebody that they don't know. And that scene is so hilarious because there's a fair bit of truth to it, right? Like the one guy's trying to get the priest to fight him, and he's like spraying with a hose and all that stuff, right? And the guy won't engage, you know. So it's interesting how our psyche and our psychological game, which I think is mostly about this conversation about engaging in violence. It's interesting.
Absolutely, Shaun. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that I agree with the boys, and you know, the thing that stands out in my mind is the different kinds of visualization that a person can take. And so, if you've done just a single martial art class in any bizarre martial art, even in the weakest, most ineffective martial art class, whatever, name a martial art that you don't like, that's the class that you're in. You just do one of those classes, and now, at the very least, you've got a practical framework of understanding what it feels like to evade a punch or do a block or throw a kick at a bag or whatever the case is. Now you've got like some practical understanding of how to move your body in a way. Whereas if you never attend any martial arts, if you never take a one-on-one class with a subject matter expert, if you never ask your neighbor who is throwing all the fancy kicks in the air out on his driveway before he has his morning coffee, if you don't take the opportunity to do at least one class of pressure testing your understanding of human movement as a martial art, now you're just working on a fantasy-based illusion. And so the idea that popped into my head is, you know, One Punch Man. My boys, when they were young, they loved One Punch Man. And I don't know what it is about One Punch Man that they loved. I think it's the fact that, you know, he had so much power that it only took one punch to take care of business. Not, you know, we could build out that conversation in many different philosophical ways. But the idea is, I think some people have a One Punch Man scenario in their head where it's just one punch and the problem goes away. But in reality, as that person punches, their wrist folds, they break their wrist, they realize that the person's still standing in front of them as they get one right between the eyes as a return. And so the fantasy is not the same as visualization. Visualization is based on practical understanding of how to start building out physical skills, technical attributes, how you will feel on a bike as you're racing your first 24-hour solo, how you will feel as you dig your shin in a Muay Thai kick into someone's thigh. Understanding what it feels like in your mind is important, because if you can't do that, if you can't apply practical experience to your visualization, now you're freaking One Punch Man. Now you're the fantasy Marvel hero in your mind who's going to deploy in a moment with the super cape and take care of business. And that's just not how it plays out.
Just see red, bro. You don't know me. You don't know my mentality. I got a comment here. The real Nick Fury jumped on from the Instagram side, and he says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. A black belt is a black belt until they get punched in their face.
Like, then they're a brown belt, then another punch, they're purple belt.
Absolutely. And
that's Hanzo Gracie special.
I think this This brings up a really fantastic point. I'm glad you brought this up, Shaun, is that visualization requires practical knowledge. Otherwise, it becomes it can become a fantasy. Whether that is an accurate fantasy or not, it's still a bit of a fantasy in my mind if you don't have any practical knowledge. Seb, what do you
got? Something. Yeah. So Shaun, brought an excellent point here, and I'm going to rebut my previous point, not completely, but bring a bit of nuance to it. So, if visualization is a tool that can be utilized by somebody that hasn't done anything action oriented to have physical capabilities to engage, then what else can you do? You've all made phone calls. You've all, we're all experts at that. And so if you're at the point where you have not engaged in this world, and so you're not going to turn into a superhero, but you may turn into somebody that uses their head to problem solve something that's in front of you, and experience, i.e., calling the police. How do I report this to the best possible description? How do I give my location accurately? Do I even know where I am? Do I even pay attention to where I am half the time when I walk between buildings? So if I walk between buildings and I go to the bank and I find myself in front of a container, say somebody was behind that container doing something, would I even know how to describe where I'm at? Take a little tactical pause, maybe take a couple steps back, go hide behind a car or behind a building or something, and call the police. Do I even know how to describe the location? Those types of things. And so you can also visualize those things. You can visualize providing information that is accurate. You can visualize describing an individual. Every time I hear descriptions, I always laugh, like, oh, the guy has a beard, or he has a blue t-shirt. That cool story, bro. Like, he ditched that t-shirt on the corner and that beard can be shaved in a second. Tell me something I don't know because you forgot to tell me that he's 6'6" and black. And I use black because obviously if somebody is trying to describe somebody, but they are living in a world where we're getting canceled for everything, they may not say certain things. And believe it or not, I have seen this in policing. We are chasing these suspects around, and it takes 10 minutes before we hear that the person is dark as night. Like, you are doing a disservice to to everybody by doing that. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, you may not have the physical ability, you may not have the skills, maybe you're going to work on it, maybe you never intend to. How about you optimize your ability to do that with the tools that you do have? I
love that. Pat, what do you got?
Yeah, it's interesting how we've how this conversation's kind of evolving, right? Because that's not engaging in violence, that is reacting to violence. And so reacting to violence, like talking how Seb's talking, like being able to strategically engage is a whole other conversation. And it's interesting because there's a lot of skills that we can, even just situational awareness. People's situational awareness, I'd have to say, if you have not trained or honed or experienced having to live in an environment that requires situational awareness, people are clueless. Like, they're clueless. Like, someone would have walked past that beginning video. Like, I'd say 9 out of 10 people would have walked past that dude and not even engaged because they didn't even know what was going on. The antennas didn't even go up for a second. And sometimes we watch some of these videos and you're like, oh, that person didn't even engage, or that person didn't even react. Their situational awareness and their personal programming through their life, it didn't even, the antennas didn't even signal. They were just like, I'm on my way. So it's interesting just being able to hone that situational awareness is such a prior piece to the puzzle of reacting to violence or dealing with violence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that one. We actually, Shaun and I had this conversation. We had Kelly Sayer on, and we were chatting afterwards, and he was like, it's just kind of sad that people need, like, that people are, she teaches situational awareness for like corporate environments, and it's just kind of like sad that we have to teach these things to people, but it definitely needs to be taught because there are people wandering around the world just completely in their own world, not engaged with what's going on around them. And it is it's mind-blowing to see sometimes. Shaun, you got any points on this?
I do. And so, I'd said earlier that, and again, I've got to do further research on it, that our prior programming designs and produces our decisions in the very near future. So, the words that I'm saying have been designed by my neural network a second before I've said them, 2 seconds before I've said them, in a sense. And I'm using a loose example. And so our programming, if you've only learned like one karate punch in your life, that's the only programming you've got. Other than, you can watch some videos on YouTube and with your Mark 1 eyeballs, you can try to memorize them and think that in the future you're going to deploy the fanciest spinning back kick in the world. But that's a fantasy. For now, all you've got is your one karate punch. And so if that's the only tool you've got, in the moment, while you're running the math on your limited situational awareness, what can you rely on? You can rely on one tool, your freaking karate punch, and then you can rely on all of your fantasies. And more often than not, this has been my experience when I'm pressure testing someone, they defer to the only tool that they've thrown at least once. If they've thrown it 10 times, they'll be quicker to defer to it. If they've thrown it 1,000 times, that's the only tool they've got, in essence. And here comes the karate punch. They're going to one punch karate punch their way through life. With the other bolt-on layer being, and then I'll do those other things, those imagined things, those visualized things, those fantasy-based things. And so the more tools you have in the moment, the more tools you can deploy. And I've found that the more capable you are, the easier it is to deal with the situation in a way that doesn't go full violent. Like you can look at a person and laugh at them. What did you say, you idiot? Whatever, man. And see where that goes. You don't have to get all up in someone's grill. You don't have to poke them in the chest. You can just smirk at them and see where that goes. Because you have really all the moves if you've been training all your life. Most people that are standing in front of you wanting to cause a problem have only got a single karate punch and a bunch of visualization in their fantasy world. And so, as I said in my post this morning, I've been in the game for over 40 years of violence. And it's not like I'm out there every day in my forest doing violence on trees. I'm just really comfortable with violence. I'm just really comfortable with kicking, with elbows, with knees, with all of the things. I like it. And so I don't have to wake up in the morning and say, oh no, I've got to go throw a kick today. I've been in the game so long, I'd be bummed if I didn't throw a kick today. And that's where you have to be in life, I believe, is engage in these kind of moments with enough understanding and enough passion that eventually you enjoy building out your toolbox. And the more tools you've got in there, the easier it is to smirk at someone and walk away rather than yell at them and try to get in a fight. So if you want to get in the game of causing change, of saving people, of stopping an abductor, a single karate punch ain't gonna do it. But if that's all you've got, don't build out the moment into your head where you create a situation that is going to require the karate punch.
This is there's so many ways to go with this, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on this quickly as well. There's an issue for me, at least, is the media aspect of this. We all watch movies. You brought up, you want to be a superhero or One Punch Man, which is a great anime. If you guys ever haven't watched it, super fun. But the point is, like, you think of James Bond, right, with the judo chop and the guy falls over, right? Or you think of the movies now where they're all hyper choreographed, super John Wicky, like diving around. None of those are fights. Neither of those are fights, right? Fights are they're violent and they're extreme in they're sweaty. There's things that most people don't have a grasp on until they actually do it. But I think the media hypes up the people's fantasies, like you're saying, Shaun. They have these bolt-on, like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna do this spinning tornado kick and it'll be totally fine, it'll be super cool and it'll look awesome. But nobody's ever tried it or seen it in real life, and it just doesn't make sense in anything. I want to get your guys' thoughts on the media aspect of it. Do you think that that has a lot to do with people's fantasy realms of their own capabilities? Seb, what do you think?
Well, I think it's pretty much bled into absolutely everything. You know, everybody wants to have that posturing of competence without the work that leads to it, you know. And that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't. And yes, you can create a victim world and at the same time create a world where everybody wants to be a superhero, but those two things are completely at odds. You're going to need to spend the time in if you want to whip the cape out, you know. And so I always laugh at these sort of dichotomies. But all that being said, imagine being an accountant and also being a savage and being capable of doing certain things. You know, there's something truly cool about this. It's not just about the people that work and dedicate themselves to using controlling violence as a way of interfering with something. It can also be just regular people, and we see it all the time in all kinds of martial arts and all kinds of endeavors. You know, guys. I think the current SIG best shooter in the world is a civilian, right? Like, and he goes to the best special operation units in the world and teach them little things that they don't know about shooting, you know, and these guys are receiving it with open arms because they do know, and he knows his limitation. He's never been on a two-way range, but he knows that he has certain things that he can add to the games. And the guys that are professional at this are never discounting that. They're always, you know, somehow taking something out of everybody if they could to make themselves better. And so if those guys can learn from that person, and if that person can learn to the point where they become the best in the world, I mean, what does that say about everybody else? Like, it doesn't matter what you do and if you're doing this full time or not. We all know that we are going to be faced with violence at one point or another, and it can only be one encounter for you, perhaps, but that one encounter can have catastrophic consequences. So it's a low probability, super high risk event. And unfortunately, it's very hard to motivate for. So you're going to have to find other reasons to engage in this and really to at least, I would say, build up a fundamental skill set, which includes your ability to be situationally aware, ability to recognize situations, ability to at least have some form of escape mechanism or self-defense or something. But you have, you know, it's kind of like waiting to be ill to start getting healthy. You know, you have to do that preemptively. And if you engage on it on your own terms, all of the intimidation you take out of it because you've made the decision to do it, and it becomes self-imposed, which is a lot easier than if violence finds you.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick, you got any thoughts on any of this?
It's funny you bring up the media, you know, seeing that, you know, I've been working in the film industry like for basically since I got out. And it's funny because the film industry, media, television, movies, I think what people don't realize is that they overglorify everything. It doesn't matter if they're in a courtroom, you know, oh, object, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. You've ever been in a courtroom, it's not like that. You know what I mean? Like, have you ever been in an actual, like, you know, I think that people have done plenty of skits of, like, you know, warfighter movies where it's like, you know, why isn't the movie of the, you know, hanging out in the friggin' shacks, like playing video games and friggin' waiting for the next mission? You know what I mean? Because they only, you know, you only see this finite moment in time. The overglorifying of fights. Like, I hung out with many a stuntman, and, you know, I watched their fights. These guys are amazing martial artists, and you know, they've repeated to me, like, I have James. He's an amazing martial artist, Filipino martial arts, jiu-jitsu, everything. And he's like, I don't know what would happen if I got in a real fight. He's like, I'd probably pull the punch. He's like, when the adrenaline would hit, I'd probably pull the punch. I wouldn't hit him. You know what I mean? Like, I have the skill and I've drilled it. But at the time, I'd probably, like, you know, glance past his face for a camera angle instead of actually hitting him. And I'm just like, wow, that's an interesting place to be if he ever had to react to violence. And so I find the media can be really bad. Like, I think one of the best ones was Letterkenny, the hockey players. One of the hockey players skits on YouTube where the guy's chirping at him, and he's like, "If you've ever been in a fight, you wouldn't be so keen to get into another." right? Because there's there's some real friggin' real world consequence to engaging in violence. And I think the last thing I'll just quickly point on that I was just kind of thinking about as we're talking is the ability to ride adrenaline. So a lot of us are adrenaline junkies. Like, we jump into planes, ride mountain bikes, all that stuff like that. We've learned to be able to have a almost Zen mindset while engaging in high adrenaline activities. If you've ever had to engage in a scenario like we're talking about, that adrenaline shot is going to be severe and extreme, and people do not know how to ride that. And that will negate any logic thought of your, doesn't matter, fantasy, pre-training, whatever. When your adrenaline kicks in, a lot of people are just, the light gets turned off and they're either a doe in the headlights or they're going into full attack, the fight or flight. We all know those things. But being able to engage yourself into adrenaline activities doesn't have to be violent, and being able to think in them is, I think, a great tool.
I could not agree more. I'm wondering how many stunt people out there who have spent a lot of time doing martial arts would actually pull that first punch. I don't know about the second one or the third one, but the first punch might be like just a winger and be like, wait, what am I doing? And pull out a gauge on somebody.
Well, it is interesting because what they would do is yet to be determined until they get in the actual moment. And so there is a difference. There's realistic based scenario training, and then there's fantasy based scenario training. And stuntmen to some degree are in the fantasy game. And I'm not saying anything in respect to how well they can fight or not. I'm going to make a very careful point here to delineate between realistic scenario training and not realistic. And it's the edge, it's the feel, it's the vibe. When you're in an actual violent encounter, there's a way different energy that cannot be recreated other than when it's for reals. If it's acting, it's that edge can be attempted to achieve, but unless it's like the real thing has a different energy. It feels different. And I think you've got to feel that level of realism in your scenario-based training. I don't know why, but a guy just popped into my head, Randy Turner from Direct Action Combat. Randy is a retired Tier 1 operator who does all kinds of scenario-based training out in the Ontario region. And I've seen Randy work with highly skilled performers and brand new newbies. The ability to take anyone at any skill level and improve their abilities in scenario-based training is not that easy to find, is not that common. Finding the right people to be around who can help you understand these things more clearly, or perhaps more correctly, more realistically, is not that common. Seb would be a good guy as an example of someone who could do this extremely well. I might be a guy, Pat might be a guy, Chance might be a guy. But the point is this: it's your job to find the right person for you. And while you're shopping for the right person, ensure that you're not just grabbing some rando out of the yellow pages, shrugging your shoulders and saying to yourself, I hope this works out. I hope this was the right choice. Because you might only get a one and done. You might step into a new game that you actually don't like because of the person that you randomly chose out of the yellow pages. So I'll wrap it up with this. All of the questions that you've got, all of the scenarios that you'll face, there's solutions to these things. You have to choose wisely. And if you don't know who to choose, if you don't know which direction to go, ask around. But don't just ask your freaking neighbor. Ask people like the panel. Our community as a whole knows someone for everyone. And so it's your job to reach out and say, hey, who should I engage with for ... And you'll get a freaking answer. You don't want to be asking yourself the question and looking for an answer when you're in the moment, when you're actually in a violent situation. It's too late then. That's where you'll crumble. So get in front of it, ask around, you'll get your answer. Then you get to sweat, blood, and tear it to figure out what you're about and what you need to learn.
Yeah, I definitely see that if someone pulls a knife on you, that is definitely not the time to look up your phone and be like, okay, where do I find a collie instructor? This would be great. Like, it's just not like you're already done. Now I got a question here, and then we could probably do some final thoughts, but I just wanted to touch on it here. Archangel 7 on the Instagram side said, good point. You have to understand to even decide on what action or what escalation is needed. Do we agree? Visualization and training takes it from fantasy to slowly building skills when experience presents. What do you guys think? You think that it does it require both, or can you gain some skills without? Pat, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, you'll it's better than nothing, but I think reality-based training, scenario-based training, visualization, I think these are very powerful tools. I mean, and they're not hard to do. If like you've already engaged in the game, you've already engaged in learning a skill set. How hard is it to integrate that? It's not, and it just should be. You know what I mean? And we have plenty of scenarios with all that reality-based training, psychology, and training. It's exponentially helped law enforcement, military, all that stuff. That pre-visualization just becomes a habit. I mean, that's just the way I walk into everything. It doesn't matter if I'm riding a mountain bike or if I'm having to engage in violence. It's like, and I'll even put it back to the mountain bike. If I'm rolling up to a cliff edge to drop in, my risk management system has already made 6 different scenarios. If I freaking twist my handlebars and I go over the handlebars, how am I going to roll out of this? I'm already looking for landing spots. So having that pre-visualization with training, with reality-based stuff, I think it's just a natural thing. Like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do it? You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't and why wouldn't it help you? I mean, I'll ask you guys, like, why wouldn't it help you? I mean, it just makes sense.
I agree. Sam, you got any thoughts on it?
Yeah, of course. Anything that's sensible, that's applicable, is going to help a little bit. Maybe not enough to save the day, but certainly help you do a little bit better potentially. Visualization will, even though actions are not necessarily intertwined in it. Training definitely will, and then you have the last piece of this, which is operationalization of that training, because that's also another escalation into that capacity building. Because you can do all the training you want, but until you actually operationally use that, and when I say operationally, I don't mean from in a professional standpoint, I mean just until you weaponize what it is that you train for, it's going to be very difficult. And so there are ways to achieve that. You can get really close. I mean, Nick was there online earlier. While he's a pro MMA fighter, you want to test your fighting abilities. That's probably a great way to do it if you feel so inclined. There's other ways that are, below that you can still engage in a meaningful way and really test yourself. And I think that a big part of this is also building that self-confidence. And even if you engage at a level that's lower than, say, MMA, you go to jiu-jitsu tournament and you start doing really good, or you do well enough that you're surviving, you're building that self-confidence as well, which also can help. And it's not based upon a fallacy. It's based upon some skills that you're capable, at least, at your belt level, skills that you're capable of weaponizing. So those things will help for sure. And the question is, how good do you want to get at this? And what is the priority that you place on it on account of everything else you have going on in your life? And so that's a question that you have to answer.
That's a great point. Shaun, what do you got?
2 things. One is, when you look at this panel, we were all village idiots at one point. I mean, when we were young, we didn't know much. I couldn't have fought my way out of a wet paper bag when I was a teenager. Well, now I can. And that took some time, but I started to figure it out. And along the way, I got wrapped around by people who were squared away when I wasn't squared away. And they put me in a position where I now know a thing or two. And that's my job. My job in life is to get better at these kind of things, just as it is everyone's job. Make no bones about it. That's what you're here to do, to get better. So if you don't have like the PPCLI wrapped around you, or you don't have tier 1 wrapped around you, or you don't have ... wrapped around you to make you the kind of person that you want to be, then it's your job to go frickin' find it. Grab it by the collar, drag it towards you and say, teach me. And so, again, Nick was on earlier in the show. You want to learn how to do MMA? Bam, Nick. You want to do scenario-based? Bam, Randy. Chance, you talked about knives? Bam, Funker Tactical. You want to ... If there's something that you want to get your nose into, we've had him on as a guest. The resources have already been on the show. And if they haven't been on the show and you want another resource, we'll find the resource for you. All you got to do is ask. Here comes the crunch line. Part 2. You can want it, but you got to do something about it. And that's where it all falls apart. Wanting the solution is different than getting the solution. And the get requires sweat, blood, and tears. It requires cost, resources, time, money. And so, how much do you want to invest in your future? How much do you want to invest in yourself or your family? How much do you want to get in front of the problem that is inevitably going to come down the pipeline towards you, where you have to do the thing that saves those around you, either in a small way or a big way? You can wander through life blindly, hoping that you'll one man or one punch man your way into the solution. And that is a fool's paradise. So, simply put, you want to get in the game? Get out of your head. Get into the action with the right people who'll take you in the right direction. Stay in it with some consistency for an amount of time that you can generally feel, okay, now I'm more comfortable with these moments.
Yeah. On the Instagram side, Dave Cattell jumped in here. He said, well, Shaun, I ship out in a month. Let's chat. So that'll be good to see. And I want to add just one last thing, and then we'll do some final thoughts on this, is that you see this online a lot of martial artists who are chirping about other martial arts. Right? Like, oh, BJJ is better than this, and maybe Kali's better than that, and Muay Thai is better than all these things. But in reality, when it comes down to it, against an unskilled opponent, anything is better. So, like, you could have like my brother's a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo. The skill level that he has with his kicks against an untrained, unskilled assailant is gonna outmatch basically anything they can throw at him. I'm not saying that he's a friggin' god by any means. Will BJJ work better in that situation? Who knows? Will Kali work better in that situation? Who knows? But it'll always give you a leg up, and it'll always give you a skill set that is more than, unless you're going to go do chi training. That's not a thing. Not a real thing. But I just wanted to point that out, that any martial art, any solid martial art built on a history of combat training is going to help you way more than nothing. So if you don't want to do BJJ, go do Taekwondo. You don't want to do Taekwondo, go do Kung Fu. You don't want to do that, like, find something that works for you. And there is a style that'll work for basically everybody. So we went down the martial arts track on this one for sure on this conversation, but I do want to get you guys' final thoughts on anything we've talked about, drawing the line, finding the line, thinking about it, visualization, anything at all. Seb, what do you think?
You know, one massive benefit of engaging in that world and really developing yourself has a lot more to do with what you don't have to do than all the things that you may end up doing. You know, how many fights have been avoided by way of a person carry themselves? because their confidence is quiet confidence based upon having put in the work, and you can't fake that. It's authentic and it oozes through your pores. And when somebody is standing 10 feet away from you, and especially if they're posturing and they're overcompensating, they will very quickly feel what it feels when the real person that's capable is next to them. And that's something that's vibrational. That's something that oozes out of you. It helps with your leadership, and I say this respectfully. I mean, yes, you're not going to beat people, but the fact is, you'll see how there is a propensity. Humans will respect that. And it's weird. It's primal and it's strange, but there is a way that people speak to you when they know that there is, not that you're going to do something, but that you have the capacity for it. It's almost like a hierarchical response. It's strange, but it's real. It's, and it helps. But more importantly, you, as you are faced with adversity at whatever realm, you're going to be able to tap into this as well and allocate that same sort of self-confidence, capabilities and capacity towards what it is that you're dealing with. And so it helps you in a lot of ways. It's not just about the 5 times that you may have to use that in the next couple of years. It's all the other times that you won't have to do anything, because it screams out of you if you spend the right time doing it. And so I encourage you to see it holistically, not just narrow-mindedly.
I love that. Beautiful point. Pat, final thoughts?
Yeah, so kind of bring it back around, and I think it was something that Seb had said earlier, about like this like utopia world. There are many people in this world that totally believe that they will never engage in violence. They don't want to engage in violence, and they'll never have to do anything violent. And I think that is a very dangerous mindset. Why not get the training? Why not be exposed to stuff in a controlled environment so that you have, like Seb says, the confidence? I mean, there is a very truthness to the peaceful warrior. You can walk and carry yourself knowing that you have the ability to deal with a situation, avoid a situation, do that rules of engagement in your own mind. It's very vital, and to live in this you know society where it's like no violence, no violence, no violence, no violence. I think that's dangerous, and it's almost inviting violence into your own world, because you will see it at some point and you will be exposed to it, either on a personal level or within a close proximity to you. And being able to react to that, even from an emotional psychological point of view, and not be traumatized if you've completely negated yourself from that world, I think is very important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Shaun, what do you think?
Yeah, I started off the show with my own opinion of I'm pretty comfortable with violence. And I said that I kind of like it. And I don't mean that I go seeking it. It's just that I should have rephrased that and said I'm extremely comfortable with it. Maybe liking it is the wrong choice of words, but I do kind of like it. And so with that said, we all have to start somewhere. And again, at one point in my young life, I started from square one and built it out through the people around me, through a deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper understanding, until I'm the dude that I am today, who can look at most situations and smirk. Because generally speaking, I feel like I'm qualified to manage the moment. And there's a wild difference between knowing you can take care of it and hoping you can take care of it. The psychological comfort of knowing that you've faced this several times before with successful outcomes, you can see the path forward easily when all those around you can't. Having that ability allows you to stay so much calmer than everyone in the moment. It allows you to get above it, look down at it clearly, and be more precise with how it all unfolds. While everybody has their jaw hanging and tripping out, you can be cool as a cucumber and set the standard for the future for other minds. And so, whatever happens in the moment, that's the moment. But as you're in the moment, there will be others observing the moment. And what you're really doing, honestly, is setting the standard for them. for the future, for the next generation. So if anyone is acting out and you have the right way of getting involved with that, what you're doing is teaching those in the moment how this is supposed to be done. And so be careful on how you demonstrate the situation's solution so that those around you don't pick up on the wrong lesson.
Yeah, I agree with that one. I don't have a ton to add to this. It's my own personal opinion, but I think that a society that is, let's say, peaceful, as in what we kind of have today, is built on a foundation of violence to begin with. And it usually stems from, and I mean this I don't mean that violence washed across the country and everyone became peaceful, but these systems are built upon the threat of violence, let's put it that way. In that if everyone has a gun, usually people are going to be really polite. People are going to, like, if the consequences are always there in the background, people behave a little bit better, a little bit more respectfully, I think, in my mind. So having that violence in your back pocket and having that capability is, like Seb said, it bleeds out of you. It does. And it simmers down a lot of confrontations way before they even begin. So I don't have anything else to add on that. I just wanted to say thanks, guys. Pat, Seb, Shaun, fantastic conversation. Really appreciate this. I think we need to dive into this a little bit more depth, and this might be a collective episode later down the road. So I appreciate it. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you all next time.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see you all next time.